Hi, this is Elias, and you're watching Data Science for Humans. Welcome back, and welcome to part 2, where we look at what a CSV file is. Just to recap, in our previous session, we used Spider and Python to read in a CSV file from disk. Now, I haven't actually stopped to explain what a CSV file is. Let's take a look at that right now. So a CSV file is a comma-separated value file. In other words, it has rows of data that are all separated by commas. CSV files are simple text files. You can open them in any text editor, like Notepad or TextEdit. In fact, why don't we do that? In our previous video, we were working with this file 2428.csv. And it's a fairly small file, only about 3 kilobytes. But let's open it up in Notepad. So I'm going to right-click on it, click Open With. I'll choose another app, and then in this list that comes up, I will choose Notepad. Here's our CSV file, 2428.csv. Nothing fancy. Our first row has our headers, FY, Youth Justice Region, admission type, and T count. And notice how all these values are separated by commas. And then after our first row, our first header row, we have a series of data rows. Now notice for some of these data rows that we have counts when they're in the thousands. The author of this data set, the Ontario government, decided to put this number in quotation marks. They had to do that because if this did not have quotation marks, this would not be read by the computer as 3043. This would be read as 3. The T count would be 3, and then we would have an extra column with the value 043. This will be important in a few minutes. Now, something you might notice about this data file, about this CSV file, is that the column names are not very descriptive at first glance. However, this data file actually came with something called a data dictionary file, or a file that describes what these columns actually mean and what their acceptable values might be. Let's take a look at that. So here's our data dictionary for our 2428 CSV file. And you'll notice that this data dictionary is quite detailed. It tells us not only the variable name, but gives a label and a definition for each, the expected values and the valid range, and the type of data that we can expect. Now we have downloaded the English version of this file. Notice total count. So this is the total number of youth within each admission type, open, secure, or community. And this data dictionary is telling us that this will be a numeric data type with a range between 0 and 9999. Let's go back to our data file for just a moment. You'll notice that some of these values don't exactly follow that format. In fact, we have a comma. Based on the data dictionary, I would interpret that we should see data formatted without the comma, but we don't. This will be important in a couple minutes. Now, when we actually go to work with this data frame, these columns might not be very descriptive and they might be a bit difficult to work with. But thanks to Python and pandas, we can easily rename these columns and make this file easier to work with. In fact, we could import this file into pandas, into Python, rename these columns, and write that data frame back out to a CSV, making it much easier to work with. Let's do that now. So back in our Spider program, first thing we're going to do, we'll review these two pieces of code. Again, we're importing pandas. We're instructing Python that we want to use the pandas library and then giving it the alias PD so we don't have to write pandas all the time. Then we're setting aside a piece of memory, a variable, called data2428 that holds our CSV file. Now we're going to rename our 4 columns. And how we do that is by typing data2428, our variable name, dot columns, and setting that equal to something called an array. And you create an array with square brackets. And this will be an array, or in other words, a list of string values. And string values are anything that are contained in quotes. So our first column, we'll call it fiscal year. Our second column, we will call our region. Our third column, we will call admission type. And our fourth column, we'll call count. And notice how all these values are separated by commas. So let's run this code. Again, it looks like nothing really happened. We don't have any output over here in our IPython console. But if we look at our variable explorer now, check this out. The column names have changed. And if we double click on the value, we can confirm that in our data frame. So remember before, fiscal year, this was just FY. Region used to be YJSD_R. So notice how we're already cleaning up our data file. Now, what if you wanted to save this out to your hard disk? Say you're completely done. That's all you wanted to do was rename those columns, and you didn't want to do it in Excel. Well, we can use pandas once again to write out a data frame to our hard disk. We can do that by calling a function on data2428. Check this out. data2428.to_CSV, and we'll give it the file name that we want to write our modified data frame to. 2428._cleaned.csv. And now we can run it. And if we go back to our demo folder, you'll see a new CSV file in here called 2428_cleaned. Let's take a look at that file. Notice how we have our new column names, but there's something else going on here. It looks like we have an extra column. This is because Pandas has given our data frame an index. In order to actually address a particular row inside of a data frame, it needs to have something called a unique index. If you don't give it an index when you're reading in the CSV file, Pandas will come up with one on its own, basically just a number that increments by 1 for each row. If you don't want to write out that index, and later on we'll show how to actually build your own index, but for now, if you don't want to write that index, you can give this toCSV function an extra parameter and say index equals false with a capital F. And if we run this one more time, in this case I use the F5 key to run this, and we reopen our cleaned CSV file, you'll notice this time it has fiscal year, region, admission type, and count. That's the only change we've made to this file, is to rename our header columns. Now that we know how to rename our headers in a data frame and write this out to a CSV, now we can start to clean up this file. See you in the next video.